My name is Miranda Aisling. I'm the founder of Mirandas Hearth, which is a nonprofit that's been around for 5.5 years, and our mission is to build a community through creativity that is approachable, affordable, and accessible. So thank you guys for having me here tonight, and thanks to everyone who came out from the Hearth. It's really wonderful to see such friendly faces in the room. I'm going to briefly introduce myself and what the business has done so far, and then discuss our proposal for our work in Beverly, and specifically our hopes for repurposing Briscoe Middle School as an art center. So Miranda's Hearth was founded in 2013 with 4 people in a 4-person jam session. And since then, we've grown to an organization that has served 25,000 people in the past 5.5 years. We've done that mostly in Greater Boston, focusing in Cambridge and Somerville, which is where I received my Master's of Education. But in July, we came up to Beverly for the first time, and we've been really excited to get to know this community through programming after over 2 years of research into where we should bring our efforts next. We have 120 plus events in 2019, half of which will be happening in Beverly, including a weekly community night, 2 festivals, which I'll mention later, and presentations like this to get the community involved in the project. So I myself has worked in arts administration. I was the director of operations and visual arts at the Umbrella Community Arts Center for 4 years. I wrote a book called Don't Make Art, Just Make Something, which has become the philosophical underpinnings for our community, where we encourage that creativity is innate in every single person. Some people suppress it and others develop it, but it is certainly there. I have a bachelor's in painting and pottery. I'm a practicing artist myself, and I think it's very important for anybody working in arts administration to keep up their own practice. And I also received a Master's of Education, like I mentioned, from Lesley University, which brought me to this area. And one of my mentors actually was Kit Jenkins, who brought me to the North Shore for the first time. She's one of the founding directors of Raw Artworks out in Lynn. So I cut my eye teeth in community art at their wonderful organization. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Umbrella. I worked there for 4 years, and it really showed me what's possible in old school buildings specifically. It's one of the precedents for our idea for Briscoe Middle School. The Umbrella was founded in 1983 in a building that had been around since 1929. By the time the artists got together to save this building, it had been empty for over 10 years, and there were literally stalactites growing from the ceiling of the theater. So I have a much more hope for Briscoe Middle School, which, while old and well used, does not have any stalactites. So to me, it seems like a positive approach to take. Currently, the Umbrella is home to over 55 artists, many of whom have been there since 1983, which shows you how steady artists are as renters. They've been there for over 30 years now, and the community that they've grown in that space is truly astonishing to see. I hope you guys will visit it. And very importantly, the reason that this could happen is because the Umbrella has been leasing the school building from the town of Concord for just $1 a year for the past 36 years. This has also happened in Space Manor, which was actually founded by the former executive director of Emerson Umbrella, or the Umbrella. His name is Jerome Neeson, and I've had the pleasure of sitting down with him and getting his advice on this project based on his expertise repurposing many schools and other buildings throughout Massachusetts as art centers. So in Art Space, he really dialed down and made it as specific as possible, because if you make your business plan more simple, it is more likely to work. And so what we're trying to do is really follow his example, keeping it as simple as possible by taking raw studio space, raw classroom space, and turning it into artist space. So Space Manor has had 80 artists in it since 2001. It has also been leased for $1 a year from the town of Maynard, and it's also an old middle school. I believe it's from the same era, although I could not find on their website the actual age of the building. So this is exactly what we would like to do here. It's worked in many towns throughout Massachusetts, and it creates a significant social and creative shift within the economy and within the community. Briscoe Middle School is larger than either of these buildings at 144,000 square feet. However, only 75,000 square feet of that is actually private rentable space. There's also that significant auditorium, the gym, and then quite a bit of circulation and mechanical space. So out of the 75,000 square feet, we estimate that we could have 150 to 200 artists. We would love to serve the artists in Beverly specifically. To put that number in perspective, Montserrat churns out at least 100 artists every single year, so their alums alone could fill that building in just 2 years. But I think there's a strong need throughout the North Shore region, and honestly all the way up from Boston. Several art centers are closing in Boston because of the increasing real estate value. And so people who have been practicing there for 30 years are suddenly without a home. And these are not amateur hobbyists, these are professional artists who've been working for a very long time. So we look forward to being able to serve the community here and certainly give precedent to the artists in Beverly. And I do think that we could fill this building just with artists from the North Shore. But if for some reason we couldn't, there is a strong demand. The Umbrella where I worked at had a turnover of about 1 studio per year and a wait list of over 100 artists. Every art center that I've been connected with has at least that significant amount of numbers. Even if you look at the art centers in Beverly that are already here, the 222 Cabot Street Studios has a very long wait list and low turnover, as does Porter Mills. If you go up to the Gloucester region, you have the Rocky Neck Artist Colony, which has over 280 artists who are part of it, and I believe there are only about 40 studios available for rent in Gloucester, all of which are also full and have very low turnover. So we think there's a strong need for this, both in this area to serve the specific community and regionally. And it's actually a very stable business model. As you can tell from the artists who've been at the Umbrella Community Art Center for so long, artists have a reputation that we're working hard to overcome, but they are actually very strong and stable renters. It's so rare to find good studio space that's affordable that once you get your hands on it, you don't let it go. And so we estimate that based on the square footage and the number of artists, we could make $900,000 just from rental income before any donations, before any fundraising costs or programming. And that would be a steady, consistent, leased and signed form of income that we could always depend on. So the reason we came to Beverly, we were looking for a post-industrial town that was working on telling a new story as it came into the new century. And Beverly was a very interesting place. You have a lot of wonderful arts organizations that are already here, already doing great work. And that's exactly what we wanted to look for. We wanted to find a place where there was strong support for the arts and interest for the arts. But as you can see in our wheel, there's a missing hub. There's missing key infrastructure to support the local creative community in Beverly. And that's what we can hope we can provide by repurposing Briscoe Middle School as a BevArt. We could be the wheel for the hub that already, or we could be the hub for the wheel that already exists and provide a publicly supported place where people in Beverly can come to access the arts, where professional artists in Beverly can have infrastructure to support them, and importantly, where the hundreds of thousands of visitors who are coming because of these arts organizations can access the local artist community. Because a lot of these organizations have missions that focus on bringing in artists from the outside, which is a strong resource for local Beverly. But we also need to make sure that Beverly is supporting the artists who are already here, who are born and raised and went to school in this community. So here are some of our numbers. I won't dive too deeply into them, but the base message is that artist studio space is a sustainable business. It can work, it does work. When you start introducing programming, that's where you start having significant risk. But it's, like I said, a very simple business model. You have raw space, you have artists who want to fill that space and who are willing to pay the money to do it. One of the things that makes this possible is that, as I'm sure you all know, Briscoe Middle School requires quite a bit of work. It has, we estimate, $7 to $9 million of renovation just for the code compliance in the building. And we want to make sure that work happens. But because we would not be changing the use or the zoning of the building, we'd be continuing with education, albeit specifically arts education, we would be able to enter the building without changing the appliance and thus immediately bringing it up to code. So instead of having to do significant fundraising, financing, development, construction, which will take many years, instead we estimate that we could be in that building in under 6 months for under $500,000. So it would be an immediate, quick impact that would support the community, that would activate a part of town that really needs community support and a little bit of infrastructural support. Following the model of Jerome Neeson at Art Space Manor, the way that we would pull off this initial investment is by identifying potential artists and asking them to sign leases actually in advance of us having the building. Once they signed leases, we would ask them to give us deposits, and we would use that cash reserve to secure bank financing. So we would not need to do any of the public fundraising or private donations, although of course we will take donations if anybody wants to give them to us. But the model works on its own. And I think that's what's so interesting about artist studio space, that it breaks this dynamic that arts are not sustainable, that arts need lots of external support. but artists want to make their businesses work, want to make their practices work, and space is the most important part of that. So I wanted to just tell you a little bit about what we're doing now, which is part of why I'm here. We're specifically starting with the people first. Rather than build it and they will come, my education and my experience has taught me that if you bring the people together, they will help you build it. And that's what we want to do. So we actually came to Beverly in July of last year with a tiny house, which some of you actually have been in, I believe. Over 1,300 people toured that house and learned about us right then. So that then, when we came in January to start doing weekly creative community programming in the Cabot, people had already heard of us and they started coming through and asking questions and coming to City Council to hear a little bit more about the story. So we're already starting to gather that group, and we have a strong network, the 25,000 people that we've served so far in Greater Boston. Our next big events are actually 2 festivals that we're excited to be bringing to Beverly, which I hope you will all consider coming to. On June 1st, we're hosting Nourish at the Hale Farm with Historic Beverly, and we're celebrating the art that's already here, which is a big message of this building. Beverly is so rich in the arts, and there needs to be more celebrations that put that rich creativity on display. And so we're hosting these as a demonstration of what could happen. This is what we can do without space. Imagine what we could do if we had a beautiful building to do these festivals on the site around the building. Our second one will be the 5th annual Massachusetts Tiny House Festival, which celebrates creative living and encourages people to think about how they're living and why they live that way. Last year we had 9,000 people show up to Marshfield Fairground, and we're hoping to have at least that much coming this year to the North Shore Music Theater. And we hope that that'll be a big push for Beverly and for the Beverly arts scene. So thank you. I appreciate your time. I would love to take any questions. I do realize this is a big project, and there are many questions that could be asked, and I want to respect the council's time, so I would also be more than happy to sit down in person with any of you. I know I've talked with you some already, but I think this would be a great project for Beverly. It's something I'm obviously very passionate about, and I've been really humbled by the support I've already received on So Far Just an Idea.
Thank you, Miranda.
Sure.
How about questions or comments, anyone? Councilor Houseman.
Thank you for your presentation, Miranda. There are lots of questions we could ask about it, about your proposal. First of all, I would say I'm not only intrigued, but feel very supportive of the proposal. One of the things that Beverly taxpayers might say is, hey, the city could make a lot of money with this property, rather than allowing a nonprofit $1 a year to occupy it. So what would you say to taxpayers of Beverly in terms of how it addresses Beverly culture and more importantly, perhaps more to the point, Beverly municipal revenue?
Sure. So I think importantly, the city has not received any money from this property in over 100 years. So this proposal is not taking money away from the coffers. It is, of course, not giving lots of money to the coffers. So we're not costing the taxpayers anything financially, I think is a first important step. But I think it's also important to remember that coffers are only one way to think about a rich city. And Beverly has been putting a lot of effort into developing housing, which is an important step for the city. You need places to live, but you also need a reason to live there. And the only community center in Beverly that I know of is the YMCA, and of course the churches do a lot of community work as well. But one of the reasons we chose this town is that there actually is no community center. There's no place for people to go to engage with other people in the community, like the events that we've started to host. I mean, we've had people from many different generations, from many different walks of life in the city come and show up because there aren't enough places to do that. There aren't enough places where you can walk through the door for free and experience something enriching, something where you can learn, and something where you can meet other people in your community. So I think this will give back in significant ways outside of revenue. Revenue is obviously important and obviously something that city councilors need to consider. But I would also push you to consider that revenue is not the only thing that makes a town great. And there are a lot more things that you need to consider in terms of making Beverly a place that people want to live and a place where people want to stay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Councilor Latter.
Thank you, and I know you've been to a few of these meetings. It's right in the middle of my ward, and it's been. I share with my colleague. It is an intriguing proposal.
Thank you.
But I mean, back to the economics, is there a way to quantify the economic drivers of having an art community here as opposed to some, I mean, is there a way to wrap a number around that so it just doesn't look like we're giving everything away?
Yes, there certainly is. If you work with organizations like Mass Creative, an article just came out that, oh, and I wish I knew this number off the top of my head, the arts economy in Massachusetts as a state is one of the largest contributors to the economy overall. And the reason that is that arts create a ripple effect throughout the entire community. So while you might not be receiving specific tax revenue from this site, the people who are coming to Beverly and staying in Beverly after they see a show at the Cabot or North Shore Music Theater, they could be going to one of those shows in a place that wasn't Beverly. They're visiting for the musicians and they're visiting for the specific theater. And those are both wonderful things, but you want to be able to take those visitors and say, you just came to Beverly and you don't know what hit you. And now you want to come back. And so that's the economic impact that this can have. People are coming to Beverly for restaurants, for shows, but we want people to come to Beverly because Beverly is an interesting place. And because Beverly is a place where they know things are being made, where people are making things for themselves and for their community. Thank you.
Just to follow up on that,
Sure.
I mean, our nonprofits give so much back to the community in so many different ways, and it always makes me think of Doc Wiley from Endicott College, who every year would come in, and Endicott was nonprofit, and they had a nice payment in lieu of taxes that they fulfilled every year. But he always stressed that the economic impact that Endicott College had as a nonprofit on the city of Beverly, and what his students and what his staff and the parents and the visiting sports team, what they brought to Beverly. And your organization or something like this would be the same thing, bring more and more people into Beverly that wouldn't come to Beverly otherwise. I mean, I sat with you a couple of weeks ago and we talked for about a half an hour, and I could have listened to you all day.
Thank you.
And I hope I didn't offend you when I looked at you and I said, are you 30? And you told me that you were 25, and I was like, wow, listen to this person that I'm talking to. She is so polished at 25. And when we were finished, I said, please call the city clerk, Wes Slate, and get on our agenda so you can share your story with everybody else here. Because the easiest thing the city of Beverly can do is put a sign out in front of Briscoe and say, for sale, and then go out and try to solicit developers to put housing there. We have a lot of housing in the pipeline right now in the city, and I think people forget every now and then we still have that big parcel of land that's zoned high-density residential up at Apple Village that could cause too much housing at some point in the city. So this idea, I mean, I can't say enough how exciting it is.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
How about Council Flaherty, then Council Lang?
Thank you for coming. I do believe it is an intriguing idea. I do have a nonprofit background, like what Paul was talking about. But this kind of a side part with the economics part, would you ever see yourself envisioning maybe working with a for-profit or another nonprofit within Briscoe to make sure that it is economically an advantage for the city?
Absolutely. I mean, so our concept is that we would become a nonprofit real estate agency. And so what we would look for is nonprofits, artists, and community benefit organizations to rent at affordable rates. So part of the work that I've been doing now is talking with other nonprofits in the city that have community-based missions, educational missions, or arts missions, and seeing if they would be interested. And what I've found is that there are a lot of people who need more affordable space, or they need to grow and they haven't been able to grow because they've been stuck in the one space that they can afford. So we definitely want to partner with other nonprofits. We'd be open to a lot of mixed use in the space. The only hesitation I have with that is that our model works because we're not changing the use of the building. So it just depends on what we can fit within the educational use of the building so that we don't have to do the immediate renovations, which makes it not feasible for a nonprofit to do this work.
But I was thinking maybe the for-profit could necessarily do those improvements. It might not get in there as soon as you'd like 6 months, but a for-profit company goes in there, whatever it might be, and because that's a beautiful auditorium, it's a beautiful looking facility that you could kind of maybe partner with that could make it work for everybody.
Sure, I mean, if we found a nonprofit or a for-profit partner who would come in and do the renovations, I would be more than happy to work with them. I think the issue, and I've talked with developers in town. I've talked with a lot of different folks to see if partnerships are possible. And the issue is that if you put in any development in the building, if you put in 30% or more, you have to bring the entire building up to code. And suddenly that makes it so expensive that you have to get the biggest bang for your buck out of it.
Right.
So this soft touch, long-term approach, and we'd be happy to partner with many different people. I mean, I am a community organizer. I believe things happen when you work with other people. But we want to make sure that it's actually feasible and that we can keep it affordable.
David?
Yeah, this is a really interesting project you're proposing.
Thank you.
President Guanci, can this, the reuse committee, you were on that committee, would this be allowed with the reuse? Is there any reason why it would not be?
No, I mean, the reuse committee, the finding was that we weren't going to be able to keep Briscoe as a city building. It would be too expensive to renovate for city offices, a police station, a public works center, or for municipal inspections. So, I mean, the bottom line was that's where that committee ended. And now it's, the mayor's in the process of putting together a committee and put out a request for proposal. We're not there yet, but this is something that we could put on the table.
Well, and certainly my goal in being here and in talking with other people is that hopefully the RFP will be written in such a way that this project is possible. And so I've sat down with Aaron Clausen to make sure, and he knows exactly what we're planning, and I've asked him if leasing is a possibility. I mean, we're also open to acquisition, and we could pay back to the city, but the issue is if we pay back to the city, it takes away from our ability to improve the building. So my request is that we be able to put all of our revenue into improving the building and making the public benefit for the town through that, rather than giving back to the city directly. Because I think to Tim Flaherty's point that nonprofits give back in a lot of different ways, and there are a lot of different partnerships that you can do. I did want to also mention that there have been a lot of schools, as I'm sure you all know, that have been turned over, and public property is a rare commodity. So while obviously administrating this building and renovating this building would be a huge headache for the city, I think it's still important to hold on to public land while you have it. And giving it to a nonprofit is still a public use. So we would still be allowing people to walk through the building in a way that wouldn't happen. You're not going to invite people into people's apartments, but you would certainly invite people into studios. You would invite them to use the auditorium, which we see repurposing as an event hall, with taking out the chairs and flattening the floor, because that was one of the needs we found in Beverly, was that there are a lot of beautiful seated theaters, but there aren't enough spaces for people to host big open events.
So would you want the city to lease the property to you, so the city would retain the ownership, but release it to you for $1 a year, or would you be willing to do some other way to take the property?
We would be willing to acquire it. Leasing is the model that I have precedent for, which is why it's the one that I used, and I think it's a lower risk for the city. But we would be happy to acquire it, and I believe that we have the business model to make it function. I also think that once we're in the building, once we can invite the community of Beverly to walk through the doors and see what's happening, we will get significant support from people in town to make sure that it continues to happen there.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Councilor Houseman again?
Yeah, I had an opportunity to sit down with Miranda last week, and it might not be too much to say that I sort of grilled her on the economic and financial business plan.
It was good
Having
practice.
gone through that with when we were trying to come up with the business plan for the Caput Theater. So I just want to say that I was very impressed with the homework she's done and continues to do on trying to build up an economically sustainable model for the proposal that she has. And I would just, when you look at the wheel with the various different cultural and art institutions we have in the city, to second what's already been said, I mean, nonprofits, the creative economy, as Dr. Immerman liked to talk about, has a lot of indirect economic positive impacts for the city. You can sort of analogize it to the airport, which doesn't directly bring much in the way of jobs to the city, but they always talk about the many millions of dollars of indirect economic benefit that comes to the city from that entity. And this, this proposal, it seems to me, very much could bring a similar kind of impact to the city.
Thank
Well,
you.
it's something that people, as a community as a whole, can get excited about. I mean, if you happen to be on Facebook and go on the Beverly Facebook page, most people aren't getting that excited about apartments up and down Rantoul Street. I mean, this is not that we don't need them, and not that they're beautiful and well-built buildings, but this is something different.
Yeah, we really believe in yes and. I mean, it's not about detracting from the positive growth that has happened in the city, but recognizing that one kind of growth does not a city make. You need to make sure that there are multiple ways for people to get engaged, multiple ways for people to experience their town. And I did want to say to Councilor Hausman's point, and because Paul Guanci outed me on my age, while I am only 25, I have been doing this work for over a decade. I went to graduate school when I was 17 and have been in this area doing this work since then. And I'm very passionate about creating operationally sustainable arts organizations. I think it's something that our country as a whole needs to be better about. We lag behind many, many other places in the world in terms of our efforts to support culture. And as we've seen from the tragedy in Notre Dame with the fire, when things go away, we notice. But we don't notice when they're here and just making things better. So it comes to visionaries, to people planning to make sure that those things come in the first place.
Council Flowers?
Thank you.
Oh, did you not?
No, I was debating. I know, that was unfair. I gave you a look, I know.
When I give him that look, I just
Yeah.
get no.
Emphatically no.
Thank you. I will say something. So first of all, Miranda, thank you for being here and presenting to us and sharing your vision with us. I think the reason I was debating whether or not I would say anything was because I think, unlike Councilor Hausman, who had the chance to really talk with you more about the economic piece of it, I know you and I did talk a little bit, but I was just sort of mulling over some of the pieces. I'm really intrigued by your proposal. I also am wondering if you can just sort of help me think through, and I think I have a sense of the answer, but this is a hypothetical. If you were leasing the building as opposed to acquisition, which I hear you are open to either one completely, but I feel like I hear you have a preference or a precedent for the leasing. One of the things I'm just thinking through, if the boiler were to break or a major thing were to go wrong with the building, would the cost then, I hear you saying you would like to put the improvements into it over time. Would immediate cost, in your view, would that be part of your plan? Would that be a city expense? Would that be DPS? So can you just help me just think through some of that?
So in the precedents that have been done, all maintenance to the building is taken on by the nonprofit who leases the space. And so we would definitely be committing to taking on those risks, and obviously they are significant risks. I've talked with Tim Howland, who oversaw that school for a long time. I've talked with Gene Shearburn, who did the finances of the operations of that school, so I know that the gas bill is going to be larger than anything I ever want to see, but I'm ready for it. And I think what this model shows is that we actually have a really strong cushion. And one of the things, we could make the rents lower than what I said in this proposal, and nonprofits in the past have done that. They've said, we want to make it as affordable as possible, and then the boiler breaks and they close. And that's what happened to the Danforth Museum, which was renting an old school. So we want to make it just a little bit above and tell people that not only are they getting an affordable space, but they're getting an affordable space with a plan. And so my ideal, which I think would be best for the city and for my nonprofit, would be to lease for 10 years and then acquire it. Because if we do something really wrong, the city can take it back and say, we gave you a chance. If we do something really right, then we get the building and we get to keep going. And I'm obviously confident that we'll do it really right. But I understand that it's a risk, and it would be taking a chance on a creative organization. But I think it's a risk worth taking.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer and just helping me think that through. And it's very helpful because my initial sort of question mark came when we were talking about your Councilor Hausman's question about what would you say to taxpayers. And I think you rightly said this hasn't been bringing in tax money. But my question was, if the city continues to incur the expense for the building or major problems, and also has taken on the expense of problems with down the road with the new middle school, it would be not taxpayer money that it's,
Correct.
bringing in, but money out. So that's really helpful to me to hear
Yeah.
that from you. So
Yeah.
thank you for helping me think that through.
Our goal is that it would never cost the city anything, it would only be a benefit. And it would be a benefit through economics in a wider array, but also through community benefit. Artists who've gotten involved in projects like this become a lot more civically minded, as you can tell by the artists you might have never seen at City Council before. People get involved. And they get excited, and we really believe that that's how you pull projects like this off. But we also believe in business accountability, and so we want to make sure, obviously things go wrong, and I do hope that the community will step up and help us do it. As I said earlier, our business plan is without any donations, and we're already fundraising. So we can do it more quickly if we get support, but we also can do it without any impact on our own.
Sure. Thank you very much. That was a really helpful answer. I
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Councilor. Councilor Frades.
Oh, thanks. You make such a compelling argument. I haven't heard this before. Your skills are very polished and unique, and we don't have the time to go into the finances of it. But assuming you're very successful and you have a great space, what happens to some of the other incubator studios, especially one of your spokes up there, Porter Mills?
I think that the reality is there's a huge need. So I see us becoming collaborators. I see us pushing each other forward. And the more, I believe in making pies bigger, not in fighting over the pieces. So the more people we bring to support the arts in Beverly, the better. I think what the work that the Beverly Arts District doing, that Porter Mills is doing, that Montserrat has been doing is really good. Porter Mills is a for-profit organization, and so they are working to keep their organization open and profiting. And that, I think you have to be very aware of what every organization's mission is. So Montserrat College of Art, their mission is to educate young art students. And while they're doing some community outreach, that's not their mission. And so our mission is specifically to serve the creative community. And part of the research that I've been doing so far is to make sure that we are collaborating rather than competing, which is, for example, what we want to do with the auditorium. Like I said, I envision taking out all of the seats and creating an event space so that the Beverly Rotary Club doesn't have to keep meeting in Danvers, but can actually meet in Beverly, in the old middle school in an art center.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just one quick question. Can I ask Brian Ailes what his recollection of when we were talking about the financing and making the building safe for other inhabitants? I thought the pricing was so high that it was just not going to be possible to do any renovations for the school building itself.
I know Mr. Ailes probably isn't prepared to answer that question, but if he would like, he's always welcome to speak.
Sure, I'll see if I can recall.
Not putting you on the spot.
As we put you on the spot.
No, thank you for the question, though, but I think a lot of our focus was on if the city retained the parcel, which would trigger certain types of improvements, ADA compliance, and once, as Miranda said, you go 30%, you're all in. The other consideration that we had to consider was the uses that we would be using it for. In some of our analysis, we looked at police station retrofitting, which is a higher grade of construction than may be required for residential or the type of studio space that Miranda was talking about. And the other component was that anytime you do a public project, it triggers prevailing wage, and those types of investments tend to be significantly more than they would be in the private sector. So all of that told, I mean, we were looking at something, and I'm looking at the president because he was sitting there as well. I think it was upwards of 40 million to 70 million, depending upon the use, for a full, complete restoration, landscape, everything.
Okay.
And those support, I mean, in the research that I've done reading a lot of these documents, it was about 30 million estimated to repurpose as a school and 70 million to repurpose as the police station. And so I was talking with Councilor Flowers about this. I know one of the other significant interests in that building is senior housing. But I think that the cost of renovating the building for housing, let alone with the supports that senior require, is not conducive to keeping it affordable. And so it makes a lot more sense to do good, modern, affordable, amenable senior housing and new construction, and to leave the beautiful historic building to community benefit.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Again?
I just want to say that I think that the price just to keep the piece of land, just to mitigate the building that was there, was like $6 to $7 million. So even if we just wanted to keep the land and get rid of the building and have it as open space or a park, there was a significant.
I think it was
cost
7.
as well, yeah.
Yep, and so that's why, I mean, to Councilor Flowers' point, our goal is to not cost anything and to bring significant benefit. Pretty much everything else comes with huge price tags associated with it. But this model, which has been done in buildings that are a lot older and a lot worse off than Briscoe, can be done very quickly and immediately start creating revenue. And the best thing for a building is for it to be in use. The longer it's empty, the longer we deliberate, the more things can go wrong, the more pipes can freeze, the more vandalism can happen. The best thing is for people to be in there every day. And artists are a very high reward but low density use. So I know traffic has been a concern around that area. And if we're looking at 200 artists, none of them will ever be there all at the same time. So we'll have enough people that the building is safe, that it's interesting, that it's occupied, but we won't have so many people that we're clogging up the streets. And it's a very, very fine balance that I think artist studios strike very well.
Great. Thank you for doing your homework before you come before us.
Thank you, and I would be happy to talk in depth about numbers or any other questions with anyone, both on the council and in the broader room, and on TV.
Promote your 2 events before you go, real quick.
Yes, so we have our weekly community nights every single Thursday from 6 to 8, so feel free to drop by and chat with me, bring an art project, or just bring your dinner.
Where's that?
That's at Waring Downtown in the Cabot. And then we also have our Nourish Beverly Festival on June 1st, which will be to benefit both Miranda's Hearth and Historic Beverly as an example of nonprofits working together. And then in October, we'll be bringing tiny houses to the North Shore Music Theater. And we're very excited to be partnering with them to celebrate creative living on the North Shore.
Good stuff. Thank you so much.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
I would entertain a motion to take a brief 5-minute recess.
So moved.
Second.
In favor, aye. Opposed, motion carries.